Adolescence during the phases of self-growth begins at an early age, developing characteristics that lead to maturity, yet different roles increase and intensify whereas many start developing mimicking behaviors. The manifestation of these mimic behaviors often involves the way one thinks, or believes. Often adolescents grow up failing to express their own point of views, rather they express what they mimic to others. The problem comes with underdevelopment self, voice and mind. Social factors play a large part in why many teens can tend to become problematic. Often the social issues lead to losers of voice. When we work through the processes of development of self, voice and mind, we must consider social issues, biases, shortchanges, expressions, education and more. Because the female gender has been shortchanged, or else biases in educational programs, at home, and in society has hindered these human beings from progressing to their limits, it has caused major underdevelopment of voice in particular, yet it stems to lack of self and mind development. Take a moment to read our groups of articles that will help you decide which strategies will benefit you the most. We have compiled many articles for your convenience with the latest information on self-development of mind and voice. Development of the Self, Voice and Mind, The Female Secrets. The book entitled Women's Way of Knowing has received a lot of attention. This book delves into the minds of women and brings to light the way they think and assimilate knowledge. 135 interviews were conducted asking women about their gender, relationships, the ways they acquire learning and their principles and morals. The writers of the book then formulated a theory that there are 5 types of knowing. In these types, women base the way they perceive themselves at their approach to other people and the community. The interviewers managed to see that the way women think about knowledge and education has an effect on self-perception. In the book, foremost in the ways of knowing is silence. In this way of knowing, a woman may blindly trust and believe in any authority figure. She acknowledges that she falls in a stereotype and she inevitably has difficulty figuring herself out. Many of the women have been silenced into believing that they and their voice do not count. They are led to believe that they are secondary citizens and they should keep their opinions to themselves. They are also brainwashed into thinking that they have no right even to form an opinion, much less voice it out. These kinds of women have been suppressed by either their families, when they were children, and by the men in their lives, as grown-ups. Most likely, they have a passive personality, which just accepts the word of these people as truth. Received knowledge is at what time the learning is gleaned from listening to other people. The women who are in this way of knowing have no self-respect or do not have the confidence to back their ideas and views. They believe in what they hear and what they read from books as the truth. They are incapable of trusting themselves to reach an opinion. Next is subjective knowledge. Women who function with this way of thinking, respects her own views and acknowledges that she is an individual with her own mind. Oftentimes, these women are very stubborn with their points of view and ideas. This type of woman has gotten it into her head that she is better than most men and she has a difficult time relating or understanding the way men think. This information is politically incorrect, as we note biblical women with subjective knowledge and not one of these women were haughty. Procedural knowledge is often defined as the voice of reason. Women in this way of knowing are more level-headed and have a clear grasp of their capabilities and strengths. This way of knowing is defined into 2 parts, connected and separated. In the connected part of this way of knowing, women are connected to each other and they often dissect or analyze a subject matter with the help of others. They can have discussions and share facts and ideas regarding the subject matter in a peaceful fun gathering. They share tidbits of information or truths to form a larger truth. The people in this way of knowing have respect for each other and they act more like friends gossiping than adversaries trying to outdo each other maliciously. Whereas, in the separated version of procedural knowledge, the women are often objective and have every intention of doubting and putting each theory through a test. Hostility is more often than not present during discussions and participants tend to shoot down the ideas and views of others. In the final way of knowing, which was gathered from the interviews, some women are good at integrating their opinions and views. They are aware of their flaws, want development of self, voice, and mind to occur in them. Women with this kind of way have a disciplined subjectivity, which makes them capable of forming their own opinions and reaching their own decisions. Go behind the scenes with women around the world. Development of the self, voice and mind, behind the scene of women's issues. Several books were published in regards to women's issues, which lead to development of self, voice and mind. So many of the books published today talk about women's issues, which these authors bring into light what they think in relation to assimilation of knowledge. Some of the popular issues addressed after interviews were in relation to gender, relationships and gender segregation. The issues discussed brought into focus processes of learning and the standards of common people, including moral. In theory with concrete evidence to back many claims, some authors set out to discuss knowledge. Women were asked in some interviews how they view themselves in the public eye. During the interviews, authors decided that the very many women view themselves factors into their self-perceptions. Silence was discussed. Many women showed traits of believing and trusting in almost any authority figure. Thus, in concluded interviews, some women felt that stereotype factored into the way they felt about themselves. We see that influences has persuaded many women to take on traits of stereotyping themselves, despite it is immorally wrong. Down through the centuries women have been silenced, believing that speaking out will only cause problems. The issues derived from white supremacy thinking have drifted many women into believing they are second to man. The brainwashed influencing actions lead many women to believe they do not even have the right to voice their opinion. Major suppression then has caused serious emotional stress on these women, and has caused them much heartache. Families, men, etc. has forced women for too long to suppress their emotions, which is why many women's issues are being addressed today. We as women must not accept that what an authority tells us is right. Rather we must seek our own truths to discover our individuality. We must leave the passive attitude behind us to a large degree and stand up to speak out. Women need to make a difference in the world by addressing the many issues we face today. So many authority figures that act with immature minds may tell us to keep a lid on it, however, we must not believe these authorities, since we see undeveloped minds speaking. Would you listen to your 5-year-old if she told you to keep a lid on it? In comparison, those that belittle women and put them below them are minds of 5-year-olds in action. Women, like men, should be respected. We must build confidence, self-respect and stress our views and ideas when thoughts develop. We must learn to express our emotions freely and not believe any authority, just because they said so. Authors today have discussed subjective understanding. Some people believe that because a woman is conformed to subjective knowledge that she functions or thinks that she is better than others, and that she is stubborn. Contrary to these notions, women of subjective nature put themselves below others, and their ideas focus on respect. These women may still speak their mind, yet they respect their husband as the head of the home, and respect other authorities. Sarah, Abraham's wife, is a fine example of a subjective thinker, and by no means was she haughty in any way, rather she was humble. Some authors carried on with defining procedural knowledge. With this knowledge, women conform to voicing with reason. According to some of the authors, these women have a level heads and clearly grasp their strengths and abilities. Some authors defined these women in parts rather than a whole. The authors in question used separating and connecting views, stating that women connected to others by dissecting or analyzing subjects while relying on others to conclude. Under discussion, these women were claimed to relax and discuss ideas in a peaceful setting. According to perspective views of opinionates, these women were non-prone to maliciously striking out at others. Contrary to their findings, there are no secrets that many of these types of women engage in gossip, etc., and often find themselves in challenges with authority figures. The separate versions of procedural intellect claim that women of this nature tend to join in discussions without feeling hostile. Thus, disciplinary subjectivity proved to be one of the more effective ways to develop self, voice, and mind. Discover the knowing women of the world. Development of self, voice and mind, the knowing women. A certain book came out and it tackled the way that women acquire knowledge. This book is a product of an all-woman team of surveyors, researchers who focused on the way that women think or acquire learning and knowledge. The book is called Women's Ways of Knowing. The researchers interviewed 135 women about their gender, relationships with other people, their ways of accepting or acquiring knowledge and their various moral dilemmas. As we learn about these, improve our chances for development of self, voice and mind. These interviews yielded 5 ways of knowing. These ways of knowing delve into how women perceive themselves and how they approach the world at large. It was gleaned from the in-depth interviews that the way women think regarding education and knowledge affects self-perception, and self-perception also affects the way we acquire knowledge. One of the ways of knowing or acquiring knowledge is silence. In silence, one perceives the authority figure as the ultimate source of learning and knowledge. This type of learning or way of learning encourages blind obedience to authority figures. According to philosophers, the women do not even question or try to analyze the why and how of the information imparted by the authority figure, they just accept it as the truth. In cases like these, the women perceive themselves in stereotypes which are lower than authority figures. Again, according to philosophers, they have difficulty defining themselves as individual thinkers and thus they accept what is fed to them without any resistance for fear of rejection or conflict. The next way of knowing is received knowledge. In this way of knowing, some of the interviewed women listen to the views and opinions of other people. These women have difficulty forming their own ideas and opinions. They have self-doubt regarding their capabilities, and even if they want to ask or doubt anything, their self-doubt is palpable and brings them down. It is the same as the way of knowing stated above. They also have this idea that authority figures are sources of facts and truth. They do not even seem to acknowledge that they have the capability to think. On the other hand, subjective knowledge is the way of knowing wherein women have acknowledged their sense of worth and they are aware of their brain. The development of self, voice and mind is apparent here. The women separate themselves from their sense of obligation to follow and obey other people's ideas and opinions. These women have learned to value and respect their own voice. But despite finding their voice, they are oftentimes too rooted in the feeling of insubordination that they cannot and will not try to rock the boat just for the sake of voicing an opinion. The women have difficulty seeing things the other way even if the other way makes sense. The feeling of self-doubt is very strong and the interviewees are not so confident in stating their ideas. In this way of knowing, the women have their voices of reason. There are two kinds of procedural knowledge, the connected knowing and the separated knowing. The connected version is described as where women delve into a certain source or author or theory and they dissect it with gusto. This way of knowing is non-confrontational and very enjoyable to most women. They share their ideas and opinions without any conflict and they also get to know each other through this way. The idea or theory or author is well chewed out and discussed in any way which satisfies the women in the forum without any debate. This way of knowing is in a way, gossiping, which can be very enjoyable to some of the women. The separated version relies more on objectivity. There is a sort of confrontational attitude towards other people with other opinions, which may not conform to theirs. The discussion could turn heated and may end up in a debate among the people sharing or expressing their opinions. Constructed knowledge is the last way of knowing. Here women integrate their own voices and their own sense of self with reason. They accept that subjectivity and objectivity are essential elements in knowledge. For the knowledge to be gained, these two must be conquered and made to work for the acquiring of knowledge. They move to discuss systematic approaches. Development of self, voice and mind, a woman's systematic approach. Research have found that a large percentage of women have different ways of acquiring knowledge. Knowing can be defined as a way of achieving knowledge and learning. The researchers conducted interviews from 135 women and studied these interviews. These interviews yielded some facts and theories, which support the idea that women acquire knowledge in different ways. This research gave birth to a book called Women's Ways of Knowing. The subtitle is Development of Self, Voice and Mind. It is well written and very informative and brings to light how important self-perception is. In this way of knowing, the learner views words as weapons and is worried and concerned about the effects of using strong words or voicing out an opinion. Silence here means the woman keeps silent to avoid conflict and debate. Most of the interviewed women acknowledge a desire for development of a sense of voice, mind and self. Silence encourages blind obedience to authority figures to avoid conflict. The ability to voice out views and opinions are almost non-existent. On the other hand, there is another way of knowing that leaves the women in a state of confusion and self-doubt. Self-starting is not part of this way of knowing. They are incapable or even unwilling to trust themselves to gain knowledge or wield it. Words are usually thought of as integral to the knowing process. These women appreciate learning by listening to authority figures. The female individuals have little or no confidence in their own opinions and voice. They are also prone to thinking that peers are also of the same category or capacity as they are. Therefore, they do not easily believe their peers and instead prefer to believe figures of authority as the source of facts and truth. These women equate receiving, keeping and returning the words of authority figures with learning. They are like puppets, which just retain the knowledge and mouth the words but do not really understand and analyze it. Further, women in this certain way of knowing do not trust logic, analysis, abstraction and language is called subjective knowledge. They perceive these as manly qualities or characteristics, which belong to the male gender. Most of these women refrain from using confrontational ways to support or sanction their opinions in fear of jeopardizing relationships with others. They do not assert their opinions even if they know this may be the truth or may be a fact. Instead, they meekly offer advice or just keep quiet. They perceive first-hand or hands-on experience as a valuable source of learning and knowledge. These women have a sense of voice, but they are not confident in themselves. This is a step closer to development of self, voice and mind. It is a start to these women becoming their own authority. Inward listening and watching is the predominant learning mode. However, there is something called the procedural knowledge that stresses that knowledge is encapsulated in systems. Some of the women who use this way of knowing may be liberal or conservative, but seldom or never radicals. They believe that the simple act of gleaning information or knowledge needs careful observation and rigid analysis. This way of knowing comes in two versions. Moreover, connected knowing is based in one's capacity for empathy. This means the woman wishes to understand and learn other individuals' opinions and ideas by sharing the experience that has led to the formation of the theory or concept. They believe that this sort of non-aggressive discussion or forum will lead to better understanding of each other. It is not a confrontational meeting of the minds, but instead it is an open and frank discussion of the different aspects and facets of the subject. Further, separated knowing is based on the concept that everyone may be wrong, including the person involved. This may lead to debate or confrontation within the meeting. This line of thought leads to the realization that there are no risks when arguing with authority figures. The last way of knowing, both subjectivity and objectivity, is called the constructed knowledge. Here one can cope with anything that comes along. The woman integrates her views and opinions with a sense of reason. As the woman acknowledges her self-worth, she is capable of constructing and deconstructing frames of references. With these abilities, one is capable of analyzing and developing the systems for constructing knowledge. Get the basics of everything. Development of self, voice and mind, the basics of everything. In order for women to develop themselves, their voice and their mind, they must first look deep into them and analyze the way they assimilate information. When a woman knows this, she may then try to improve herself. A study about women was conducted, and some women were interviewed by researchers, showed that women have different ways of knowing or acquiring knowledge. These ways of knowing are centered on how women perceive themselves as individuals. The first way of knowing is silence. This is defined as a total dependence on figures of authority for facts and truths. The women are virtually incapable or unwilling to stretch their minds and think for themselves. They have been pre-programmed by either their families or men in their lives that they cannot live without them. Therefore, even the thought of these women are governed by these authority figures. The women who fall in this category are very dependent on the figures of authority for opinions and ideas. Some of the women here are not even aware of the development of self, voice and mind. Another way of knowing is received knowledge. Here, women are susceptible to the voices and ideas of other people. They are easily swayed and tend to be convinced when confronted with a strong personality. They also worry that forming their own opinion or voice may hurt other people. Women in this way of knowing believe that their friends and peers all share the same view regarding knowledge. This view is that facts and truths come from figures of authority and that these facts or truths should not be doubted or questioned. They easily retain the facts and figures they hear and may also say them without really understanding them. Understand, this is all notions delivered by philosophers that have very few concrete facts to support such claims. The third way of knowing is subjective knowledge. Logic, analysis and language are mistrusted by women who think this way. They believe that logic, analysis and language are tools often used by the male species, therefore not for them. These women are almost always non-confrontational when supporting their opinions because they would hate to alienate people whom they know. They are usually very passive and they do not care if their advice is taken or not. They have a sense of confidence, but they lack the follow-through needed to support their opinions. These women often lack grounding in themselves and they need a secure, integrated and long-lasting self-concept. Procedural knowledge has two versions, connected and separated. These describe the way women relate to each other during discussion and forums. In the connected version of procedural knowledge, women are connected by their sense of empathy and they relate to each other well. There are no violent or hostile reactions to opinions and ideas, which may arise during discussions. The women here are sharing what is in their minds and their feelings, in such a way that they bond among themselves. In the separated version of procedural knowledge, the women are very eager to prove each other wrong. This kind of attitude often results to heated argument and debate. They are conditioned to think that they must doubt the ideas of others and shoot them down. The last way of knowing is constructed knowledge. These women have learned to integrate objectivity and subjectivity into their minds and they have found a balance. They usually have high tolerance of being contradicted and ambiguity. They have also managed to use their minds to construct and deconstruct information to suit them and to present a viable idea. These women are very good at analyzing and putting their ideas into perspective. They have also come into terms with the others who are more volatile and passive than they are. Adopt a winning attitude. The development of self, voice and mind, adopting a winning attitude. Developing oneself is important in that when you know that you are a capable person, you will be driven to achieve what you have always wanted to achieve. Self-development leads to self-confidence, in turn, leads to productivity, and ultimately, success. The metamorphosis of a person spans his lifetime. The seeds of self-confidence are planted in childhood, and they grow and develop into the being of the person as the person grows. Experiences, whether good or bad, serve as the steps on the ladder to a person's growth into his full potential. It is a matter of adopting the right attitude to the circumstance. Self-confidence results when a person sees that he is capable of succeeding at endeavors he gets into. Self-confidence is also a function of being able to believe in yourself and encourage yourself to reach your goals. When things go wrong, what do? Do you fall apart and crumble, or do you dust off your knees, get up, and move on into a new level of living? Remember that the way we react to situations spells the difference between getting a winning attitude or an attitude of defeat towards life. When we react to stressful situations adversely, we instill into our minds that we can never win. We start a cycle of thought that says we can never get up from where we fell. This cycle, in turn, becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that will help dig our graves. Hence, we develop the right attitude that builds us up. Questions arises, which arrives at the thought of how your thoughts of self-defeat or not depend largely on the whether you succumb to the thoughts. Self-defeating thoughts are easy to spot in that they stick out like unwanted weeds in a perfectly tended garden. They manifest in such sentences as, I can never be promoted. I'm too lazy, I will never get married, I'm too fat and ugly, I can never get good grades. My teachers hate me. Note that the sentences have the speaker pronouncing an absolute doom on him or her. These thought patterns are toxic, and even lethal, because they will perpetuate and they will just swim around in the person's psyche and allow the person forever to wallow in defeat. There is a way to combat these thoughts. And that is through cognitive reframing. But how do you use cognitive reframing and become more realistic and optimistic? When you think that, I can never get out of debt, reframe your thoughts into what is more realistic. I may have $50,000 in student loans right now, but I can get someone to help me consolidate my loans, and hopefully, I can pay everything in 3 years' time. The key is to think of the concrete ways in which you can change your situation for the better. Think in terms of what you can do, instead of what you currently see. Then use these ideas of how to alleviate your situation to move on. But first, you have to let yourself hear the words in your mind. Restructure your doomsday prophecies into words of encouragement backed with purpose. Then make a mantra out of these sentences and affirm yourself every day that you can do what you have to do. It is all about attitude. Attitude starts from thoughts that perpetuate them into your psyche. When you realize the power of your thoughts, your attitude towards life, try to learn how to develop yourself. How? Change the way you think, for you will become more self-confident. You should couple your thoughts with deeds that will lead to your goals. If you have a problem, you need to get out of, take the necessary steps. A winning frame of mind is useless if the mental winner is, in real life, a couch potato. Develop your self-confidence, and ultimately, yourself. This self-development becomes a milestone in your life that will eventually lead to your success. Take your visionary action. Development of the self, voice and mind in visionary action. We must develop visionaries to see self in the future. The oracles are mental images that we can use to create plans and goals. We can use visionary actions to create the ultimate goal that leads us to success. Using mental images, we can create backup plans to support our goals. Visions help us to see our purpose in life. When we have driven visions, it encourages us to take action to arrive at the door of success. Visions have led many people to success, since it is the backbone of our driven forces. Through these mental pictures, we have the ability to see micro goals and actually goals that amount to something. According to spectators, visions are the ultimate weapon that drives us to personal development. Once a person strives on exploration of self, thus he can use his visions to clear out confusion. Using visions, one can explore his or her insights, experiences, learning and come to a realization. Visions are the closest points of our insights that arouse our thinking to conclude realizations. We can make necessary changes once we come to our realization. Vision helps us to learn from our mistakes, also charting the energy in output to create positive inputs. If you desire to bend your adventures by perceiving for your life net, directly do the following. Jot down the major life lessons you have learned up to the existing time.